The scripture reading tonight will be taken from Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his mother and father, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband.
Some of you young people came, and I'm glad, because I'm going to try to prepare you for what's coming. Tonight we're going to talk about marriage. I assume that's coming. You're all hoping it's coming. And when we talk about marriage, the problem that we have in dealing with that is that it's quite simple, but it's quite difficult. I had no problems at all when I decided I was going to marry my wife. She was cute, and that was all there was to it. But there are days. She has many more days of struggle than I do, but there are just days. And that's part of the one flesh relationship. And so we're going to talk tonight both about the husbands and about the wives, and how this is supposed to work. Now, if we started talking about family, what scares me to death anymore is what we're doing in our country is we're destroying the very foundation of the country, because we're destroying the foundation of the family.
Amen.
Family is the foundation of the church. And we've been taught that it takes a village to raise your children. Well, the truth is the village is not going to raise them right. We, as parents, are obligated to bring up our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so the family is where it's at. And of course, the problem with that is that the husband and wife relationship is the foundation of the family. And what we're seeing is the destruction of the family by the destruction of the husband and wife and the marriage relationship. The Hebrew writer said, Hebrews 13 and verse 4, let marriage be held in honor among all people. And it's not. Somebody told me the other day, said, you know, the really good news is the divorce rate is dropping. I said, well, the reason the divorce rate is dropping is because they're just living together and not bothering to get married. And this is what's happening over and over and over again. The number of children born out of wedlock is greater than the number of children born inside of a family relationship. My daughter came home one day from high school and she said, Dad, I just want you to know, Susie and I were the only kids in our class that still have our original parents. And it was a class of 35. And out of 35, there were only 2 kids that still had mom and dad that had caused this all. Now, the problem is we're destroying. But the biggest problem is it's disobedience to God, and we're going to fail in our relationship with God. And so this is of utmost importance, because when people get married, they have to do this. And I went to a marriage seminar one time, and I got really angry at the guy because he said, now I want you to repeat after me. If I have problems in my marriage, the problem is me. And I wanted to do what Adam did. That woman you gave me. The problem's not me. And his point was this. You are responsible for you, and you are the only one that controls you. And if you have a problem, you're the only one that you can fix. So every problem that you have, address it from that personal level. Don't try to fix your mate. Try to fix yourself. What God expects us to do is not to fix our mate, but for each of us to be the best mate, the godly mate that we can be. Now, that doesn't guarantee that everything's going to work, but that's the only choice that we really have. I control me. So I need to do the things that God has asked me to do. So if I am the problem in the marriage, then I need to learn the proper things to do to fix that. And the truth of the matter is, I'm quite happy with me. And that's the problem. Because there's things that need to change. And if I don't want to change, then we're going to continue to have problems. Now, I'm going to preach a whole lesson the next 5 minutes. And you need to take these down and go study them, because I want to talk about something else. But these are the foundation principles of that. God saw after He created Adam, it's not good for man to be alone. There was not a suitable mate for him. You know, it's very good to have a dog, but a dog is not at all like having a wife. There's lots of things that are different about that, but God created the woman to be a suitable mate for the husband on that. And again, our country, we're destroying that whole concept. The Supreme Court, in their last decision, instead of marriage being between a man and a woman and being a suitable mate for this, they've decided that marriage is just a convenience factor to make you all feel good. And if it works for 2 people, it would work for 5 people. And there's no way to take a position that would not have polygamy and all the rest. I told you it's a whole other sermon here. But God instituted the marriage relationship. And God said, leave father and mother and cleave unto the wife, and the two shall become one. And Jesus added, what God hath put together, let not man put asunder. And God then is a witness of what we have done. I don't know what was said in your marriage. I don't know what's going to be said in yours when you finally get married. But the guy that I was married by turned out to be a good friend and preacher companion of mine. But at that point, he looked at me and he said, God is listening. And He's going to hold you accountable for what you are about to say. And then he asked me, do you take this woman to do it? And I said, I do. And God was a witness to that, and there's no backing out of that. So, till death do us part. And it is honorable. Now, this passage bothers me because the word there that says marriage is honorable comes from the Greek word koite. And we get the English word coitus from that, which is talking about sex. It is talking about the marriage act within the relationship. And sometimes what we've done is we've taken such a weird, strong position that we've downplayed that. I'm going to tell you what, it's a natural, normal part of marriage. And when we were attracted to our mates, that was part of the attraction. God created us that way. And so what He said was the marriage bed, the relationship, including the sex involved in that, is to be held as honorable among all men. But I'm going to tell you what, the problem is marriage is not honored at all. And the sex act within marriage is not honored, because that which is honored is fornication and adultery. Every show and TV and movie and book that you read, what they really talk about is not how good the marriage is, but they talk about all of these other. And God said, adulterers and fornicators I will condemn. And so we need to avoid fornication. So how do you avoid fornication? 1 Corinthians 7. Let each man have his own wife, singular. And let each wife have her own husband, singular. And what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Now that's your job. That's the basic scriptures. And these are not going to change. But how do we do that? And that's what I want to talk tonight. Not the principles here, but the application of how we're going to go about making sure that we're still there. Now, one of the principles that God did after he created Adam, from the beginning of Genesis all the way through the Old Testament and through the New Testament, God ordained and structured things according to male leadership abilities. We don't like that either. But again, I make no apologies for what God said. And he says specifically, the husband is the head of the wife. And being the head of the wife, what that means is that, a friend of mine put it this way: if two of you are going to ride a bicycle, somebody's got to steer. And so when we put these two together, there has to be some way of deciding. And whether we like it or whether we don't like it, I like it. God said the husband is to be the head of the wife. Now, problem. What do you mean by head? That's where the problem comes. Because it's not just a position of authority. I command and she jumps. It is a position of responsibility. And when there's a problem in the marriage, the husband is responsible to make sure that that gets solved. And so if the dishes are dirty and there's a problem, the husband needs to go wash the dishes. If there's a problem in the house, the husband, that's his ultimate bottom level responsibility. And so when I talk about being the head of the house, it's not this commanding position, but it is a position of responsibility and service and love and taking care of all of the problems there. There's been many days I've looked at my wife and I've just said, okay, I'm done being the head, it's your turn. I don't want to make these decisions. The decisions are difficult. Sometimes the decisions involve situations that you're going to make part of the family unhappy with you. I had to move one time, and the choice that I made to move made 2 out of the 4 of us happy. And the other 2 were not happy. But it was just one of those situations that you had to make the decision. And so the male has been given this responsibility of that. This was done back with Adam and Eve. It was done through the patriarchal period. Do you all know what patriarch means? Pater, for father. And so even in the whole Genesis account, it is the father figures that the family came down through and was responsible for that. The inheritance was given through the male. The priesthood was ordained through the male spiritual leadership. The prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, you know what's all in common with all of them? They male spiritual leaders that were there. Then you turn to the New Testament and the apostles and the deacons and the elders, and then you get to Ephesians 5, and it's just naturally part of the way God has structured everything. And so the idea of the husband being the leader, the head, the responsible party. Time out. In Japan, they had a whole different corporate concept. And that is, whoever's at the top is responsible for whatever happens all the way down the chain. And so if halfway down the chain this thing falls apart, the head is responsible. And many, many, many times they retire with shame. And the whole country looks at that. Whereas, you know, that doesn't work in our corporations. The corporations is you find somebody underneath you and you pin the blame on them and fire them. And in the church, among God's people, it doesn't work that way. And the husband is then the head, the responsible party for that. And this is not cultural. This is not just what took place in Ephesus. This was from Genesis 1 through the whole of the New Testament. And so when we talk about this, it's not an option. This is God's ordained pattern of how the family is supposed to work. And sometimes it's just a problem. I was teaching on this one time, and I was actually teaching on the women being in subjection to their husbands. And I'll tell you what, being the man, I abused my position, and I recognize that. I wish I could preach that lesson over again. But when I got done, one of the sisters met me at the back door and she says, "That sounds very good, but what am I supposed to do when he won't lead? How can I be in subjection when there is no leadership or guidance? Every decision that wants to be made, he won't make." And I had never thought about that. I'm just going to tell you, wives, it's difficult. But husbands, step up to the bar and be the man that you're supposed to be. Now, how do we show the headship? Is this: we do not force submission. I had a couple come in, they were having problems, and you could tell when they walked through the door. And they walked into my office and they sat down in the chairs, and the fellow leaned over my desk and he pounded on the desk and he said, "Preacher, you tell her to be in subjection to me." And I smiled and said, "That's not my job." He said, "Yeah, it is your job." I said, "No, it's not my job. And it's not your job to put her in subjection. Submission comes from her. And it's totally her responsibility. If she doesn't, she's going to answer to God for that. But she doesn't answer to you. And she doesn't answer to me. And so when any man tries forcing submission, demanding submission, he's not leading. He's not doing it right. Now, I want to spend the rest of this time on the husbands to show you that when the husband does what he's supposed to do, a woman would be crazy not to submit. But that's only when the husband lives the way God says they ought to live. And so we talk about this whole thing as headship. And headship is modified in this passage as Christ is the head of the church. Does Christ browbeat and demand? And the answer is no. So how does he show his headship? And his headship is he's made these decisions and taught us and encourages us and loves us. And this is the way the husband is supposed to be the head of the wife. He is sacrificial for the wife. The decisions that I make, I must make as the husband, putting my wife's needs and my wife's well-being ahead of self. And men have a hard time with that. We're a little bit pig-headed and selfish. But if we're godly, every decision you make is going to take into account what is best for my wife and her well-being spiritually, emotionally, physically, psychologically. What is the best that I can do for her? And then, this is the whole point of love. We are to love our wives as Christ loved the church. Husbands, I want you to ask yourself this. Does that describe my relationship with my wife? If somebody walked up out of the blue and asked your wife, does your husband love you in the same way that Christ loved the church? Could she honestly say, absolutely, without question? And so my job is to make sure that I'm loving my wife and taking care of my wife, even as Christ loved the church. And so he gave us two words here. The first word he said, even as you nourish your own body. And the word nourish there means to provide food for. Y'all ever been hungry? And when you get hungry, what do? You go eat. Okay. Well, your wife is going to have hunger. And this is not physical hunger for food. This is a hunger for companionship, a hunger for love, a hunger for respect, a hunger for communication, talk. And my point on this is, as the husband, I am to provide that nourishment for my wife. And some of the things are outside of my character. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. I don't know about you, but I love to talk. But yeah, I'm working on it. Because that's what needs to get done. I'm there for her needs, not mine. The second word was we are to love our wives and nourish them and cherish them. And that means to take care of, to have concern for, to have well-being for the wife. When that man walked in and pounded on my desk and demanded that we put her in subjection, he had no concern whatsoever for his wife's well-being. He was not concerned about how she felt about anything. He was not concerned about her. He was concerned about me. Wrong. And he needed to repent and change the very ways that he was living on that. So, how am I supposed to live with my wife? Well, Peter said, husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone who is weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Now, there's 4 things in that passage that the husbands need to know. And I just want to approach each one of these briefly and talk with you about it. And the first one is, I need to live with my wife according to understanding. Now, there was a fellow one time, he needed a tree in his backyard. So he went down to the nursery, and here was this tree. And it was a beautiful tree, and he wanted it, and it was going to grow and that. And right attached to one of the branches was a little instruction sheet, a little booklet. And the booklet said, when you plant this tree, you need to give it 5 gallons of water a week. And so the man planted the tree, and then he went back and he read the book, and he said, I'm a 2-gallon a man week. You're not going to get 5. I can only give 2. And so he began. And pretty soon he decided 2 was too much. So he gave it 1 gallon a week. Y'all surprised what happened to that tree? It died. And so he needed to change. Now, what we have with our wives, if we have a wife that needs 5 gallons of whatever a week, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's not a matter whether I think it's good or not, or whether it's reasonable or not, or whether it's logical or not. What does she need? And you don't get to debate that. And the need is not your determination, but it's her determination. And it's built into her character. It's built into her being. So how in the world am I supposed to know what her need is? You're living with an expert. She's the expert on what she needs. So, ask her. I preached this in a meeting a couple of years ago, and it was a week-long meeting, and we did it about Tuesday, and I heard from the husbands for the next 3 days. And it was really an interesting conversation because I made this challenge. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get in the car when you leave here and turn to your wife and ask her, how am I doing? What do I need to do better? What is it that I am not providing that would make it far easier for you to be the wife? And every husband that did that, the wife told him. So, it's a dangerous proposition. But my point is, Peter said, live with her according to understanding. And the only way that you're going to understand is to communicate. And the communication is to listen to her, to listen to what she is saying, to study your wife. Not just her figure and what she looks like, but to study. You know what's amazing to me? My wife can be going through a store and she'll pick out a shirt and it'll be the right size for me. What size blouse does she wear? I don't know. She can buy the right pair of pants, knowing how short they need to be on the inseam for me. What size does she wear? She can order my shoes for me. I have no idea what size. Now, what's the problem? I don't know my wife. I need to. But even more than just the food and the I need to know her emotional needs. I need to know her makeup on how she deals with problems. I need to know how she's feeling about these things. And the only way that you can really know that is to take the time to sit down and talk. And my advice is at least once a week. Sit down privately, just you and your wife, and talk to her and ask, how am I doing? What can I do that will make this relationship better? You're the head of the house. You're responsible for making it better. You're responsible for the success of the marriage. And so as the husband, it's not a power struggle. It's a responsibility. It is an obligation that I have as the husband, as the head. So I'm going to challenge all of you men, try this on the way home. Now I'm going to read the morning paper to see how many of you made it. But ask, how am I doing? So we live according to knowledge. And then Peter makes this little statement, and I'll be honest with you, we've struggled with this. All preachers have struggled with this, and that is, what do you mean, a weaker vessel? And one of the brothers in Bible class said, well, she's a cracked pot. And I said, no, that's the wrong direction that we're going with that. That when we talk about a weaker vessel, let me suggest to you a better way of looking at that. When we first got married, we didn't have a lot of money. And so what we figured out was, at that time you could go buy a Coke at Taco Bell, and they gave you a glass, and the Coke came in it. And I'm going to tell you, those glasses were indestructible. I have dropped them onto a concrete floor and they just bounced. And you pick them up and you wash them off and you go ahead and eat them. And so we gave them to my kids when they were 2-year old, and they dropped them and we didn't care. And if they ever did break, you went to Taco Bell and you got another one. So it was really good. But when we had company, my wife died 1,000 deaths. Tell the kids to set the table, and they set Donald and Elmer. Really? Now, instead of thinking of your wife as the weaker vessel in that sense, what you think of her as that which is most precious. And if we had had fine china glasses, they'd have probably never got set on the table. We would have protected them. We would have treated them as that which is special, not just weaker, but as special. And remember the parable that Jesus told about the pearl of great price? That's what your wife is, a pearl of great price. And what you do is you treat her as that which is special, the one and only one you're supposed to get biblically. And so you treat her as the most special woman in all of the world, because she is to you. And so when Peter said, live with them according to a weaker vessel, I understand that to mean giving her the preeminence and the position and treating her as if she is the fine china and not a Taco Bell glass. And so as you begin making these arrangements, she will notice. She already has. But she will notice, how do you feel about her? How do you treat her? How do you talk about her? How do you talk about her in front of other people? And those things are critical to the love and the relationship that is there. Now, Peter then said, you are supposed to honor your wife. There was, in one backwards native population, the way they worked things was, if you wanted to have a wife, you had to go to her father and you had to bargain. And the way you bargained was, because they didn't use money, they used cows. And so the standard price for a wife, I know that sounds bad, but y'all just go with the story. The standard price for that wife was 2 cows. Now there was this one lady, and she didn't get married. And so she's now an old maid, probably 28, that's something along that. But in that society and in that community, she's damaged goods. And everybody laughed and snickered about her, not to her face necessarily, but what? She's not married. Nobody wanted her. Nobody would pay 2 cows. She wasn't worth that. And there was one particular man, and everybody did not know this, but he was madly in love with her. So what he did one day, he got up and he went over to her dad and he said, "Sir, I want to marry your daughter. And here's what I'm willing to do. I will give you 7 cows if you'll let me marry your daughter." Of course he said yes. And from that day on, everybody in that whole community, when she walked by, they had a different viewpoint of her. She's the only woman there that was worth 7 cows. I preached this at home, and one of the deacons went home, and the wife said, "What did he preach on this morning?" Because she wasn't sick. And he said, "You're worth 2 cows." Wrong story, wrong application. What I'm telling you is this: treat your wife with honor in front of the people, in front of the community, in front of the town, in front of the church. What you say and how you treat and what you do it with honor to her, as if she is worth everything in life. And if you'll treat her with honor, it makes it so much easier for this whole relationship. Now, this is Peter. I'm just making application of this. You all have to judge the application, but you figure it out. And this is what he has said. With knowledge, treating her as a weaker vessel, treating her with honor, and then treating her as a fellow heir. Now, in the Old Testament time, the inheritance went through the men. But now, what Paul or Peter has just done is he says, your wife is a fellow heir in this relationship. And if you don't treat her right, it's going to hinder your prayers. Have you ever tried to pray when you're mad? Now, you might do some of those imprecatory psalm prayers, but where you pray that God's going to just smash them up against the wall and whatever. Yeah, you might be able to pray that, but can you pray for your wife when you're mad at her? I'm going to tell you what. You can't do it. And it will come out wrong. And if you want your prayers to be right and to be answered and to be heard, then you have to treat your wife with honor and with respect and with knowledge and with preference. And this is all about the husband's duty. Now, everybody always asks, why are you picking on the husbands? And my first response is because my wife told me to. And the answer is because that's the responsibility party. That is the person that is the head. That is the one that is really going to set the tone of how this works and who's doing what and how good the relationship is. Husbands, being the head of the house is an obligation. It's not necessarily fun. But it is the obligation that we have to do this. Now, take these 2 scriptures, Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3, and husbands, memorize them. And then periodically sit down with your wife and ask, how am I doing with this? How can I improve? What are the areas that I am weak that I can help you with? And as you begin doing that and showing her the honor and treating her with respect, this relationship will grow. My mom and dad were married 74 years. I never saw them fight. When they would walk through the store, they would hold hands. They waited on each other. It got to be almost comical about which one was going to wait on the other because they were trying to outdo each other in helping the other one. And I'm going to tell you what, that set an example for me that I'm still trying to live up to. And I watched that, and that's the way it ought to be. I was working out at the baseball games when I was in Tucson, being the organist for the baseball. And anyway, up in the booth, I was the old man. Still am. But I was up there, and there were two college kids, and they ran the scoreboard. They had to punch the numbers and that. And so one of them said something, and it was about how their parents were having a hard time. And so I just interjected some of these thoughts to them, and one of them looked at me and said, "How long have you been married?" And at that time I said, 43 years. To the same person? And their parents were having problems, but this was not their original parents. Their parents had already divorced, and they were both remarried, and now they're going through the second one, and they had never met anybody that had been married 43 years. And at that time, my parents had been married 60 years. And I told them, I said, that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's the way God intends for us to be. Now, after you do that, if you are a wife and you have a husband that is living with you according to knowledge, and he reverences you and honors you and thinks of you first and loves you above everything else in the world, and every decision that he makes, he puts your well-being first, you're crazy if you're not going to be submissive to that person. Because he's got your best interest. Now, does that mean he never asks you what you think? And the answer is no. Living with you according to knowledge means he will ask you what you think. He will ask. Now, sometimes he will make a decision for the family that may be different from that. But what God told the women to do was they were to be submissive unto their husbands. And I've read all kinds of things about what that means. And I'm going to tell you, biblically, it means the same thing as it means in other verses. I'm supposed to be submissive unto the government. I'm supposed to be submissive unto the elders of the church. I'm supposed to be submissive unto my parents. And all of that's exactly the same word. And the wife is supposed to be submissive. Now, that does not mean cowering in fear, because your husband's not going to treat you that way. And so what it means is there are going to be times when you have a difference of opinion, a difference of what you think needs to be done for you and for the family. And in those situations, I think the wife needs to be heard. Husbands, you need to ask, and you need to know what's going on. But sometimes you need to make a different decision. And when you do, then the wife, having been heard, lovingly defers the judgment. Does submissiveness mean you have to agree? I'll tell you what, I'm submissive to the government, but I disagree with a whole bunch of stuff. I can even be submissive to the elders when I disagree with exactly what they're trying to do. And so it doesn't mean you have to agree. What it means is after you have objected and you've told your viewpoint, you then lovingly defer unto the judgment of the husbands. But now, this is not a fearful thing. If the husband is doing what he's supposed to do, and if the husband is loving his wife and caring and honoring that, then this becomes an easy situation. It's like being submissive unto Christ. He's not out to hurt me. He's out for my best interest. He wants me to succeed. He wants me to go to heaven. He wants me to be godly. And so it's easy in one sense. The difficulty is I'm kind of hard-headed at times and decide I want to do what I want to do. And then I always get in trouble when I do that. And if I had listened to the Lord in the first place, I wouldn't have been in trouble there. So what happens is you begin learning. God has asked us to do this for a good reason. And so I've learned to trust Him on that. And then verse 33. The wife is supposed to reverence her husband. I like the newer translations that said respect. I followed an old couple through the grocery store one day. And they got to the grocery store aisle, the cereal aisle, and the man was reading all the cereal boxes, and that one looked good. So he grabbed that and he put it in the shopping basket. And she grabbed that, pushed him out of the way, and slammed that back up on the counter. And she said, "We don't eat that, you old fool." And he turned and walked out of the store and went and sat in the car. I imagine that was a pretty cold week, don't you? May have been a month or 2 or 3. What did she do wrong? Well, she could have put the cereal back, but she could have said it in a nice way. But why did she say it that way? Because she did not respect him. She did it right there in public. And it was very evident she didn't respect him. I had a couple come in, sit down. I told the elders at one time, I'm going to start charging counseling fees. Preachers end up doing a lot of counseling on that. But they came in and they sat down. And so I turned to the wife and I said, "What seems to be the problem?" Because I found out the wives usually know and the husbands tend to be clueless. But she looked at me and she began, in nice terminology, just describing what the relationship was having problems. And the husband's over here rolling his eyes. You know what rolling your eyes imply? Contempt. You've heard that before. And when the other person sees you do that, there's no respect. There's no honor. There's no love. There's no consideration. What you have is contempt. So even our facial expressions, our body language towards one another. And what happens is the wife is supposed to reverence the husband, and the husband is supposed to love the wife even as Christ loved the church. And when we get that right, you can be like my parents. You can live together for 75 years and be as much in love at the last as you are, in fact, more so than you were at the beginning. When I got married, the preacher looked at me and he said, "Now, you think you love her, but you don't." That was during the wedding ceremony. Really? Now, I'll tell you what I've learned. He was absolutely right. I loved her to the best of my ability, but I didn't have a lot of ability. There was a lot of wrong thoughts and a lot of suppositions and that. But as we have worked through the trials of life, as we've worked through the problems of the car breaking down when we don't have money, and your kids needing orthodontic work, and all of those things that you work through, what happens is you grow even more fond and with more respect for each other. The one thing I know with my wife, she would have done anything for her kids. I respect that. I came all the way down here and left her out there in San Angelo, Texas, and I left her with a credit card and a checkbook. Why? Absolutely trust her. I trust her with everything I have. I trust her with me. I'm going to tell you what. If you really want to know some embarrassing things about me, she knows them. But she won't tell you. And I'm willing to be me. I'm willing to let her see. And it works both ways. But if you don't have the respect and the honor and this Christ-based love for each other, you can't have that type of relationship. So when you find the person, now to all of you young people that aren't married yet, this is what you're looking for. I don't care if he's cute or if she's, you're looking for godly character. And that's what you can build your life on. And so what the church needs is what our country needs, what the world needs, is we need godly marriages. Marriages that are based upon God's principles and not our whim. And so your job is to read these over again. I know I only used 2 passages basically, and read them and look at them and practice them. Now, that's the marriage. Let marriage be held in honor. among all people, particularly the two of you that are married to each other. Honor that relationship. Honor that commitment that you have made. Honor God in your life. But you have to have God in your life. This is all. Okay, I'm just going to say it anyway. To the best of your ability, you need to marry somebody that is going to put God first above you. That will work. If you're putting God first and they're putting God first, you're going to get along. You'll figure out how to work that. And I'm going to tell you, every time I preach this, one of the deacons in the back would meet me at the back and he'd say, but aren't you glad that our wives married us anyway? Because I was not a Christian when we got married. But I've kept a track record. And I'm going to tell you what. It's foolish and foolhardy and dangerous. You might get lucky. But for every one that married a non-Christian and it worked out, I can probably name 10 where it didn't work out. Because eventually the worldly side and the godly side will come into conflict, and now you've got problems. So it's far, far, far better to work this relationship out ahead of time and know that they are godly. But that means you have to be godly. So you need to submit unto Christ. What's that first song we sang? Y'all remember? All to Jesus I surrender. That means submission. That's submissive. We submit unto whatever Jesus said. And you know, most people fail at the very beginning. I've had so many Bible classes where we got to that point and I said, well, here's what Jesus said. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. I'm not doing that. What do you mean you're not doing that? I'm not doing that. It's like a 3-year-old. I'm not doing that. How does that work? And someday we stand before God, and God said, that's what I asked you to do. So my advice is simply this. When God says, believe and be baptized, jump up and go get baptized. Do what the Lord told you to do. That's the idea of submission. And if you're willing to do that to start off, then you become good marriage material to the other godly people that you're going to run into. If you're willing to do that, we invite you to come. As together we stand and sing.